It's interesting, John, because the truth is it's undeniable. The stories are totally fascinating and the business model is really interesting. But you evolved beyond all of that. And something that you start to break into or develop is this concept of the death economy and the life economy. And personally, I think that the life economy is not just optimistic, but can really evolve I talk about your evolution, but you could evolve entire cultures and societies that way. Would you take a minute and describe first, I think, what the death economy is, what you were looking at in, historically, and maybe we're still in that a little bit right now. I think certainly China is creating debt traps all over the world, and those could represent a type of death economy. And then what the forward-looking life economy, this utopian vision that you have is.
Yeah, well, sure, Mark. Yeah, we're deep in the death economy, which is an economic system that really is driven by the goal of maximizing short-term profits, regardless of the social and environmental costs for corporations, and maximizing materialistic consumption for everybody. And, it is the cause of climate change and income inequality, species extinctions, environmental destruction. Those are all problems, but they're not the problem. The problem is this economic system that we've all bought into, incidentally. We're all part of it. We all have to take responsibility for it. And, it's polluting and consuming itself towards self-destruction. There's no question. The great glaciers are melting, the oceans are rising, so on and so forth. Where we need to go now is to a life economy, what economists refer to as that. And that's an economic system that's the premise, the driving goal is to maximize long-term benefits for people in all life, for that matter. And it's really about paying people. You can still make profits, but you don't have to maximize short-term profits. You put some of those profits toward making the world a better place. And part of it is paying people to clean up pollution, corral all the plastic that's floating around the oceans and recycle it, replant devastated forests, rejuvenate destroyed environments, create new technologies. We've got a good start with solar and wind, but they're just in their infancy now. Where do we go from here? How do we create energy out of air or water? There's just so many things we can do. Pay people, and at the same time, get rid of this horrible, horrible inequality of income. I just heard that Elon Musk broke the $400 billion ceiling. Why does anybody want $400 billion? And, it's absurd that there's, 3 people in the United States have as much wealth as half the country. And that's a fact. Three individuals have as much wealth as the poorest half of the United States. It's a horrible situation. And the life economy levelizes that through taxes, through putting money into doing really good things, like the things I described.
So it's interesting because there are a couple of concepts. I want to see if I could break it down with you a little bit further with regards to death economy and life economies. First is you talk about doing good for the environment, renewable energy, for example. It seems like such a no-brainer for me. I often talk about the fact that it shouldn't even be a political issue. Why wouldn't we as people want the world to be a better place for the next generation? Renewable energy seems like a no-brainer and an apolitical topic. It just doesn't make sense. You lean on privatization, the private sector, developing those concepts, but then you talk a little bit about equality and, hints of communism or socialism seep in. Do you think the government would be able to, I think you mentioned even like tax incentives, do you think the government is the appropriate vehicle to get us towards this better utopian theory of a life economy, or should the private sector really lead the way?
Well, I think if the private sector of corporations don't get deeply involved, it's not going to happen because they are certainly the driving force behind the global economy. They are the driving force behind the death economy. But there's no reason why they can't be the driving force behind the life economy. I think most of the people who run these corporations are driven by a goal of being successful at satisfying what the current call it morals, the current value system. And so even if there's a few sociopaths there and narcissists and whatever, but they're not driven by profit, except from the standpoint that profit has become the driving goal. It's your measure of success. How much profit did your company make last year or the last quarter? Or what's the stock price doing today? That's how they measure themselves. But it doesn't have to be that way. When I was in business school, I was taught that a good CEO makes a decent rate of return for investors, decent, but also doesn't maximize them, then decent, and also invests in his employees, pays health insurance and retirement funds, and invests in the local communities. Where his businesses work, he'll help to build recreational centers or libraries or whatever the community needs. That's what I was taught. But that was in the late 60s. And then Milton Friedman comes along and wins the Nobel Prize in 1976. And he says the only responsibility of business is to maximize short-term profits, regardless of the social and environmental costs. In fact, he went so far as to say when you maximize profits, you take care of doing good for the environment and society, which isn't true. But Friedman wasn't the first person to express that. It had been a growing tendency to look at that. But he had the ear of President Reagan and Prime Minister Thatcher and leaders around the world. He traveled extensively. He kept selling this concept, and it was very appealing to some of the corporations. And it put executives in this position of, well, really, all we got to measure is short-term profits.